Good morning to our listeners on Parliament Radio 105.5 FM, our viewers on the Parliament channel, and those of you joining us via the World Wide Web through Parliament's website, www.ttparliament.org. We are just under 2 minutes away from 10 a.m. and the start of today's sitting of the of the Senate. The House of Representatives concluded its proceedings on the budget for fiscal 2016 yesterday, and now it is the Senate's turn to begin work on the passage of the Appropriation Financial Year 2016 Bill 2015. This, of course, is the first day of work for the Senate since the start of the 11th Parliament on the 23rd of September, at which time there was a ceremonial opening. So this will be the first occasion for many of the new members of the Senate to occupy these seats and for the President of the Senate to preside over these proceedings. We expect at least 3 days of debate in the Senate, possibly more, and following the passage of the bill in the Senate, then the budget for fiscal 2016 will indeed be passed. So without further ado, we go over to the chamber for the start of the proceedings.
The Honorable the President.
We welcome you to the second sitting of the Senate in the first session of the 11th Parliament that takes place on Tuesday, October 20th, 2015.
Let us pray. Almighty God, we willingly acknowledge you as the supreme being, most gracious and most merciful. Look down, we beseech you, on us who are members of this Senate, and deign to assist us in the duties that we have to perform on behalf of our beloved country of Trinidad and Tobago. Open our eyes to see the truth and help us to accept it with all its implications into our lives. Direct us, O Lord, in our deliberations, so that setting aside private interests, unwholesome prejudices, and personal affections, we may treat all matters set before us with honesty, courage, and conviction. Through all we say and do in this Senate, may we give glory and honor to your holy name, inspire confidence in our fellow citizens, and make a positive contribution to the peace and prosperity of our nation. Amen. My voice is croaking.
Announcements by the President.
Honorable Senators, I have granted leave of absence to Senators Sophia Karen Choate, SC, and David Small, who are both out of the country. Honorable Senators, I have received the following correspondence from His Excellency, the President Anthony Thomas Aquinas Carmona, SC, ORTT. The Constitution of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, by His Excellency Anthony Thomas Aquinas Carmona, ORTT, SC, President and Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. To Dr. Aisha B. Edwards. Whereas Sophia Choate, SC, Senator Sophia Choate, SC, is incapable of performing her duties as a senator by reason of her absence from Trinidad and Tobago. Now, therefore, I, Anthony Thomas Aquinas Carmona, President as aforesaid, in exercise of the power vested in me by Section 44(1)(a) and Section 44(4)(c) of the Constitution of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, do hereby appoint you, Aisha B. Edwards, to be temporarily as member of the Senate with effect from the 20th of October 2015 and continuing during the absence from Trinidad and Tobago of the said Senator Sophia Choate, SC. Given under my hand and the seal of the President of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, at the Office of the President, St. Anne's, this 19th day of October, 2015. To Mr. Justin John Kay. Whereas Senator David Small is incapable of performing his duties as a senator by reason of his absence from Trinidad and Tobago. Now, therefore, I, Anthony Thomas Aquinas Carmona, President as aforesaid, in exercise of the power vested in me by Section 44(1)(a) and Section 44(4)(c) of the Constitution of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, do hereby appoint you, Justin John Kay, to be temporarily a member of the Senate with effect from the 20th of October 2015 and continuing during the absence from Trinidad and Tobago of the said Senator David Small. Given under my hand and the seal of the President of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago at the Office of the President, St. Anne's, this 19th day of October 2015. Honorable Senators, Senators are required to take the oath. Please stand.
I, Aisha Edwards, having been appointed a Member of Parliament, do solemnly affirm that I will bear true faith and allegiance to Trinidad and Tobago, will uphold the Constitution and the law, and will conscientiously and impartially discharge the responsibilities to the people of Trinidad and Tobago upon which I'm about to enter.
I, Justin John Kay, having been appointed a Member of Parliament, do swear by Almighty God that I will bear true faith and allegiance to Trinidad and Tobago, will uphold the Constitution and the law, and will conscientiously and impartially discharge the responsibilities to the people of Trinidad and Tobago upon which I am about to enter.
Honorable Senators, in accordance with Standing Order 79-2, I wish to make the following appointments to the Sessional Select Committees for the first session 2015-2016 of the 11th Parliament. Standing Orders Committee, Ms. Christine Kangaloo, Chairman, Mr. Nigel De Freitas, Member, Mr. Clarence Rambarat, Member, Mr. Daniel Solomon, Member, Mr. H.R. Ian Roach, Member. House Committee, Mr. Franklin Can, Chairman, Mr. Foster Cummings, Member, Mr. Daniel Dookie, Member, Mr. Vasant Bharat, Member, Mr. David Small, Member. Committee of Privileges, Ms. Christine Kangaloo, Chairman, Mr. Nigel De Freitas, Member, Mrs. Jennifer Batiste Primus, Member, Mr. Wade Mark, Member, Mr. Paul Richards, Member. Statutory Instruments Committee, Ms. Christine Kangaloo, Chairman, Mr. W. Michael Coppin, Member, Mr. Hafiz Ali, Member, Mr. Wayne Sturge, Member, Ms. Sophia Choate, SC, Member. Business Committee, Ms. Christine Kangaloo, Chairman, Mr. Franklin Can, member. Mrs. Paula Gopi-Skoon, member. Mr. Wade Mark, member. Dr. Daneshwar Mahabir, member.
Bills brought from the House of Representatives on the supplemental order paper, the Appropriation Financial Year 2016 Bill 2015, in the name of the Minister of Finance.
Madam President, in accordance with Standing Order 62(1)B, I beg to move that the next stage of the bill be taken later in the proceedings.
Honorable Senators, the question is that the next stage of the bill be taken later in the proceedings. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those against say no. I think the ayes have it.
Petitions, papers.
Honorable Minister of Finance.
Madam President, I have the honor to lay on the table the following papers as listed on the order paper in my name. The draft estimates of expenditure for financial year 2016. The draft estimates details of estimates of recurrent expenditure for the financial year 2016. The draft estimates of the revenue and expenditure of the statutory boards and similar bodies and of the Tobago House of Assembly for the financial year 2016. The draft estimates of development program for the financial year 2016. The draft estimates of revenue for the financial year 2016. The public sector investment program 2016. The public sector investment program 2016 Tobago. The social sector investment program 2016. The state enterprises investment program 2016. The review of the economy 2015.
Public business, government business, bills second reading.
Honorable Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I beg to move that a bill entitled An Act to Provide for the Service of Trinidad and Tobago for the financial year ending on the 30th day of September 2016 be now read a second time. Madam President, this is a money bill, and it was approved in the other place yesterday. The bill provides for the issue from the Consolidated Fund of the sum of 54,762 million or 54.762 billion under various heads as indicated in the schedule to the bill. Madam President, first let me convey my appreciation to you, to the government, and to honorable members opposite for the opportunity to commence debate on the 2016 appropriation bill in the Senate. This bill is the outcome of detailed comprehensive planning by this government and represents the initial step towards confronting the economic challenges currently facing our nation. The 2016 fiscal package, entitled Restoring Confidence and Rebuilding Trust, let's do this together, charts a new transformational course for our nation, a course which diverts from the overall mismanagement and macroeconomic underperformance of the last 5 years. The key objectives of our economic policies include macroeconomic stability, strong institutions and investor confidence, sustainable growth and diversification, job creation and the promotion of social justice. I have laid 11 documents in the Parliament which review the revenue and expenditure items over the last fiscal year and give details of the government's policy priorities and budgetary allocations going forward. But first, let us put all of this in an economic context. There is reason to be concerned about the state of the global economy. Almost 10 years after the onset of the financial crisis, the global financial crisis, the global economy continues to grow modestly at best. The IMF has reported that the global economy grew by 3.3% and 3.4% in 2013 and 2014 respectively, and projects moderate growth of 3.1% this year. Further, in advanced economies,
growth in 2015 is projected to be just 2%, while emerging economies are projected to grow by 4% and developing economies. Robust economic growth across the world, therefore, remains elusive. In the Latin American and Caribbean region, the United Nations Economic Commission has also indicated that the region's annual growth rate is expected to be 1% lower than 2014. Madam President, in addition to these global realities, our policy decisions in Trinidad and Tobago must take cognizance of the following risks: the impact of the upcoming monetary policy normalization in the United States and other developed countries, economic uncertainties in the euro area, increased financial market volatility, unpredictable and volatile commodity prices, particularly oil prices, and potential spillovers from geopolitical conflict, coupled with persistent vulnerability in emerging economies. We face a delicate balance between tightening stabilization policies without at the same time stymieing future growth and job creation, as well as expenditure on much needed public expenditure. It is against this uncertain backdrop and the subpar global economic performance that this government must manage our economy. Our performance since 2010 has not been encouraging. Members will recall that Moody's Investors Services downgraded our government bond rating and issuer rating from Baa1 to Baa2 earlier this year in 2015, and changed the outlook for Trinidad and Tobago from stable to negative. Moody's cited the following as the main reasons for the downgrade: persistent fiscal deficits, whereby this country's fiscal accounts have reported recurring deficits of between 2 to 3% of GDP since 2009, after consecutive surpluses were observed over the previous 8 years prior to 2009. Limited economic diversification and a weak macroeconomic policy framework. There's also the problem with the accurate collection of data in Trinidad and Tobago. Apart from Moody's assessment, there were other indicators of mismanagement. Over the last 5 years, our economy has been stagnant, growing by less than 1% on average. Net public sector debt grew from 32% of GDP in 2010 to 46.3% of GDP in 2015. Our cash balances moved from a positive approximately $7 billion in May 2010 to approximately $8.7 billion in overdraft in September 2015, a reversal of approximately $15 billion. Madam President, these are the facts. These are the hard, cold facts. As Minister of Finance, I give the assurance that this government remains undaunted by the tasks ahead of us. As promised, our economic plans will deliver a stronger, more robust, more diversified economy that will provide opportunities for all citizens. With respect to the budget itself, this is based on price assumptions of US $45 per barrel per oil, and I can explain that $45 is for the basket of crudes that is produced in Trinidad and Tobago, which would include oil from the East Coast, from the South Coast, and from the West Coast and the North Coast. It works out at a price for West Texas Intermediate at somewhere between $41 and $42 per barrel, which is well below the current trading price for WTI. We've also predicated our budget on a price of 2.75 per MMBTU for Henry Hub and $8 for Indonesian gas. We believe these assumptions to be conservative when compared to projections made by the IMF and the Energy Information Administration, which are all projecting an oil price for 2016 in excess of $50 per barrel. Total revenue is forecast at $60.29 billion. Total expenditure, net of capital repayments and sinking fund contributions, is forecast at $63.05 billion, which includes $5 billion arising from arrears and salary increases in 2015. So that the real budget, Madam President, is really about $58 billion. When you take away that $5 billion, extraordinary expenditure caused by arrears of salary and so on. For fiscal 2016, the budget deficit is projected to be 1.7% of GDP, and government's fiscal consolidation exercise is projected to achieve a broadly balanced budget by 2018. I now turn to the growth agenda. The growth outcomes of the economy over the past years have been very lackluster. And if we are to succeed in expanding the economy's capacity to produce goods and services and increase income to the public and private sectors, we must undertake decisive action and partner with our local private sector. The energy sector, as the lifeblood of our economy, must be restored to resilience. We must reverse the decline in the sector over the last 5 years, where oil production fell from 100,000 barrels a day to 80,000, and we must ensure it is governed by an ethical, efficient, and ever-evolving regulatory framework. Our energy policy rests on the following key pillars: timely negotiation of our imminently expiring gas supply contracts. We have gas supply contracts expiring in 2017 and 2018, long-term contracts. Monetization, discovery of reserves, especially expensive deep-water hydrocarbons. Competitiveness of our energy industries. An equitable share of revenue for major players in the sale of our energy products. Establishment and continuation of relevant downstream projects. Attraction of appropriate human resources to our nation's most important sector. Maximization of local content, local value added. Development of an attractive fiscal framework to maximize activity in hydrocarbon recovery. And re-establishment of our nation's reputation as a preferred destination for investment. Creation of an enabling environment for producer companies to be encouraged to seek new discoveries or hydrocarbon reserves, and in particular, incentives that would motivate oil and gas companies to produce what is called stranded gas, and also incentives for small operators whose capital adequacy may not be as strong as large players. We have already begun the conversation with key upstream, midstream, and downstream players and corporate citizens, and we expect to intensify these discussions over the next few months. We've also set a target in terms of renewable energy that 10% of energy produced in Trinidad and Tobago will come from renewable energy sources, primarily wind and solar, by the year 2021. This is similar to what the European Union has done, where it established 20% of energy from renewable energy by the year 2020. They are way ahead of us, so we set a lower target. Diversification. Madam President, our persistent reliance on the energy sector is untenable. The sharp decline in oil prices that began last year is another potent rationale for diversifying our economy and sources of revenue. We need to do far more than just pay lip service to the urgent need to diversify beyond the petroleum sector. We intend to encourage and invite the private sector to become involved in our diversification effort. We must find a way to get our private sector, which is risk averse, to get the motivation to invest in the productive sector. We have identified the following industries as focus areas: agriculture and agro-processing, maritime services, fishing and fish processing, aviation services, creative industries, financial services, and software design and application, among many others. One of the first things we will seek to do is to operationalize the Trinidad and Tobago International Financial Center, which has been in abeyance for the last 5 years. We will look for partners, particularly with the large Asian banks, to operate from our shores, that they look for strategic opportunities to penetrate markets in the Western Hemisphere. We believe that once we attract some signature partners to our IFC, we will be able to create the nucleus for a financial center serving Latin America and the Caribbean based in Trinidad and Tobago. We also intend to focus on creating a viable, well-developed maritime economy, including a ship maintenance facility to focus on ship repair and ship building, which should also spawn a hub for these activities within CARICOM. Another area is information and communications technology. As part of our strategy, we will complete and operationalize the Tamana Intech Park, which has been languishing for the last 5 years, as well as the Piarco Aero Park, which I recall as Minister of Works way back in 2010, I had received cabinet approval for the design, construction, and funding of the Piarco Aero Park. Yet 5 years later, what is there in the Piarco Aero Park other than a few roads and drains? We also intend to upgrade industrial estates and establish new ones in designated spaces throughout the country. We also intend to integrate ICT into our education initiatives. ICT and education is critical if we are to compete in the global economy. It has the potential to enhance learning and provide students with new skills and capabilities, and also facilitate and improve teacher training, and minimize costs in the delivery of instruction, resulting in more effective learning outcomes. With respect to agriculture, agriculture presently contributes just 0.5% of GDP. This has been the case for several years, and we intend to create a strong, modern, competitive agriculture sector. Food production must be made affordable and competitive. We must reverse the decline in agricultural production. For all the talk, Madam President, over the last 5 years, the agriculture sector has remained at 0.5% of GDP. We must incentivize our farming community to rise to the challenge of making our country as self-sufficient as is possible in food production. We must increase public sector investment and motivate private sector investment in agriculture, in particular agricultural technology. We have already started the process by unifying all of the agencies involved in agriculture under one unified head, the Ministry of Agriculture, Land and Fisheries. We brought lands back in to the Agriculture Ministry. Security of land tenure will now be accorded high priority, and as well as provision of necessary infrastructure for farmers. With respect to facilitating business, one of the biggest problems in this country is the current foreign exchange crisis, for want of a better word. We have already discussed this matter with the central bank, and during this week, Madam President, the governor of the central bank, or the central bank, will be requested to revert to the pre-2014 foreign exchange distribution system, eliminate the backlog of arrears of foreign exchange demand, and ensure that legitimate demands for foreign exchange are met. And Madam President, let me just indicate, this is being done in the context of the Exchange Control Act of Trinidad and Tobago. This is one of the biggest problems in all our pre-budget discussions. All of our manufacturers have indicated to us that one of the greatest challenges they face is adequate supplies of foreign exchange to get necessary raw materials and inputs for adding value and for manufacturing products. And going forward, we intend to have an open door policy with all stakeholder groups in the business community to ensure we are sufficiently aware of their operational realities and the challenges they face. We also intend to intensify the use of public-private partnerships. We are already utilizing public-private partnerships in a limited way to deliver infrastructure in health, education, and broadband technology. Capabilities are currently being built in the Ministry of Finance and other ministries, but we intend to use the PPP model to deliver infrastructure and services to our citizens. We feel if we can mobilize private capital, it will assist us in diversifying our economy and also providing much needed infrastructure. We have allocated $20 million to develop the necessary technical expertise in the use of public-private partnerships and to acquire the services of international experts to assist us to expand and broaden the use of PPPs. The reform agenda. As a matter of urgency, we will undertake the following initiatives. Procurement reform with primary focus on transparency, integrity, and value for money. Madam President, for the last 5 years, there's been a lot of talk about procurement. The last administration ended its tenure with only a partial proclamation of the Procurement Act, which is still ineffective. We intend to fix this problem in the shortest possible time, but certainly in fiscal 2016. We intend to create the Trinidad and Tobago Revenue Authority. We believe that there are as much as
Honorable Minister, could I just remind senators about turning off your cell phones or putting them on silent?
Thank you, Madam President. There was a lot of music there for a while. We believe, Madam President, that at least $5 billion in revenue per year remains uncollected because of inefficiencies in our revenue collection system. The Revenue Authority will combine the Customs and Excise, the Board of Inland Revenue, the VAT Office, and all of the agencies involved in collecting revenue, so that there will be shared communication and collaboration among all of the agencies. And we also intend to bring modern techniques to the use for revenue collection. There are many agencies. The Pricewaterhouse in its pre-budget memorandum made the point that if we reform our revenue collection, we could collect as much as $8 billion per year in revenue that is now not collected. We also intend to establish a general accounting office within the Parliament to provide real-time analysis of actual performance against budget and projections going forward. We also intend to create a statistical institute which will replace the Central Statistical Office and facilitate modern, timely, data-driven decision-making. This institute will be an independent body, and its board will comprise representatives from the central bank, from the CSO, from the private sector, from the universities, from the government, and so on. We believe it's about time that we have proper and accurate data in this country, for this was one of the reasons why Moody's downgraded Trinidad and Tobago. The CSO has been, the only way I can describe it, has been in a mess for the last 5 years. Financial regulatory reform within key institutions in the financial sector, such as the Securities and Exchange Commission, the Financial Intelligence Unit, and so on, to make sure that these agencies are operating in accordance with best practice. I now move to other important sectors. Crime. Madam President, let me make it crystal clear. This government is at war with the criminal elements of our society. For too long, criminality and lawlessness have been a scourge to our citizens and to our economy. And I wish to echo the sentiments of the new Minister of National Security that this is a war that we, on this side, shall win. As part of our efforts, we will undertake improvements in policing techniques and intelligence gathering, as well as strengthen our scientific investigation capabilities. This includes increased cooperation and operational investigative integration between police officers, crime scene investigators, detectives, the Forensic Science Division, and intelligence agencies as part of an integrated security approach. As a critical piece in our anti-crime architecture, we will establish a joint border protection agency comprised of the police, the Coast Guard, the Customs, and all agencies involved in border protection to manage the security and integrity of our nation's borders, given our country's location between the supplier countries of illegal narcotics in South and Central America and consumer nations in North America and in Europe. We are also a target for arms transshipment coming out of Central and South America. We believe that no single arm of law enforcement or even one ministry can address crime, and therefore we are adopting what is called a whole-of-government approach, that all ministries and agencies will come together in the fight against crime. With respect to the gambling industry, an unregulated gaming industry has yielded a proliferation of private members clubs throughout the country without appropriate regulation. We believe there's tremendous leakage of revenue and taxation within this unregulated industry, and we also believe that without regulation, this industry could be indirectly facilitating money laundering, crime, and other social ills. We will therefore amend and pass the Gambling and Gaming Act after consultation with key stakeholders such as faith-based organizations and NGOs involved in dealing with gambling addiction and other social ills that come out of gambling. But we must do something about it. For far too many years, administrations have just turned a blind eye to the proliferation of casinos in Trinidad and Tobago. We must bring some order, we must bring some regulation to this industry, especially since it employs so many people. Education. Madam President, we live in a very dynamic and increasingly complex and interdependent world. Education and learning is therefore critical for the well-being of our citizens. We are committed to continue promoting education as a high priority, if not the highest priority. Our track record speaks for itself. We created the government assistance for tuition expenses. Again, we established the University of the West Indies. We established the University of Trinidad and Tobago. We made education free from nursery to tertiary. And during the period 2002 to 2010, as a result of our progressive policies such as GATE, the establishment of the Accreditation Council of Trinidad and Tobago, and the inclusion of private educational institutions within the framework of GATE, we increased the participation rate in tertiary education by over 400%. Going forward, our plans for education include preserving, maintaining, and expanding where necessary our system of free education, ensuring that the government assistance for tuition expenses GATE remains relevant, easily accessible, and available to all citizens who are in need of it. And I stress, in need of it. I've made the point in the other place that we need to talk. If somebody is earning $150,000 a month, if such a person should be able to avail themselves of free university education, we need to talk about these things. We need to talk about whether GATE should be targeted to those who need it, or whether it should be free for everybody, whether you earn $1 million a year or not. We as a country need to talk about these things. And I might say that in some discussions with Tutor, they're of the firm view that we should look at is introducing some form of means testing for persons who are very wealthy. Improving opportunities for teacher training and development, ensuring our curriculum and teaching methods remain relevant, maintaining first world standards in terms of enrollment, ensuring universally early childhood education and maintaining our system of universal secondary and tertiary education, while ensuring that access to the highest levels of education in all areas of Trinidad and Tobago and in Tobago is available to all citizens. In terms of sport, we are determined to make Trinidad and Tobago a world-class sporting nation. We intend to develop a participatory approach to the development of sport, where all stakeholders, including athletes, sporting bodies, communities, and persons with disabilities will have a voice in the development of sporting programs and initiatives. Among our key initiatives will be the development of a Sports Institute of Trinidad and Tobago, an entity that would have as its responsibility the development and formulation of plans for sport and the upgrade of existing facilities for sport and recreational activities so that we can harness all of our talents of our citizens in sport. With respect to health, Madam President, our approach to healthcare will move away from the approach of the past, where the approach was to construct multi-billion-dollar facilities, white elephants, as Honorable Senator says to the right of me, which remain empty, unfinished, unusable at this point in time. One of the biggest problems in the healthcare system at this time is not these huge buildings, but the availability of doctors, nurses, and other medical professionals. So our focus will be on dealing with the chronic shortages of medical professionals within the healthcare sector. Of course, we will have a hospital construction program, but it must be a holistic approach. We can't just put up these huge buildings that will then remain empty for a long time because we simply don't have the doctors and nurses to staff them. We must deal with our existing institutions and modernize and upgrade the delivery of healthcare in these institutions. I now come, Madam President, to the fiscal measures. The measures presented in the budget for fiscal year 2015-2016 provide for the following: an increase in the personal income tax exemption limit from 60,000 to 72,000 per year. This was a manifesto promise of the People's National Movement, and we have met it within the first month, although we said we would do it within 12 months. An increase in the business levy, and this is part of revenue raising, Madam President, because we must balance. We have a $21 billion gap between recurrent revenue and expenditure, and while we are able to plug that hole this year with extraordinary inflows such as money available to us from CLICO bonds, from sale of shares in the methanol company, from dividends from the National Gas Corporation, from repayment of past lending from the Trinidad Generation Unlimited plant, and so on, Madam President, we must balance. So while we increase the personal income tax exemption from 60,000 to 72,000, we also felt we needed to raise some revenue. And there are many businesses that don't pay any tax at all. All they pay is business levy and green fund because they don't declare profits. So one of the ways of getting some more revenue from these types of businesses who manage through all sorts of mechanisms to avoid paying tax is the use of the business levy. So we're increasing business levy from 0.2% to 0.6%, increasing the green fund from 0.1% to 0.3%. And might I say, some of these taxes are offset against corporation tax. So when you actually begin to pay tax, like the big companies, then you can offset your contributions to these taxes with your corporation tax. So it only affects people who don't pay any tax at all, somehow. Widening the VAT tax base, increasing collection and compliance, reducing the VAT rate from 15 to 12%, while looking at luxury items and non-essential items that are currently exempt from VAT and determining which of these should now be subject to VAT. We're also increasing the threshold for value-added tax registration from 360,000 to 500,000. And the reason for this is, in addition to those businesses that don't pay any tax, there are VAT-registered businesses who get refunds. They don't pay tax, they don't declare profits, but they can claim refunds on things like vehicles and so on. So they actually end up being a net drain on the Treasury because the amount of refunds they get is not equivalent to the amount of VAT that they earn and contribute to the Treasury. So we thought we would raise the threshold to $500,000. It'd make administration easier and plug that loophole where you have companies down at that level, the 360,000 level, who are in fact claiming more refunds than the VAT they actually generate. Establishment of the Trinidad and Tobago Revenue Authority, I spoke about that already. Implementation of the Property Tax Act of 2009 is already in force. The implementation has just been waived or avoided for the last 5 years, and the last waiver, that was an amendment to the legislation, will expire on December 31st, 2015, and we decided to allow the act to operate. But we're going to go, in the first instance, use the old levels and the old rates so that people will not be disadvantaged. And we're going to create a special regime for persons who, through no fault of their own, elderly citizens perhaps living in a place like Woodbrook, let's use that as an example. When they bought their house, it might have cost them $10,000 50 years ago. It's now worth $3 million. It's no fault of their own. They're on fixed incomes, and people like that, we're going to create a special regime so they are not penalized by the increase in value of their properties through no fault of their own. We will, in all likelihood, make people like that exempt from the property tax. So it's going to be equitable. Finally, the application of transfer pricing rules. There'll be a lot of talk about this. Nothing really achieved with respect to transfer pricing. And for those who are not familiar with this mechanism, transfer pricing is a means by which multinational corporations can claim expenses not incurred in Trinidad and Tobago. And there have been many studies on this, and many of these expenses are inflated. Some of them are imaginary. So they claim head office expenses for head offices that don't even exist. So we're going to apply transfer pricing rules finally in Trinidad and Tobago so that we can deal with this whole question of transfer pricing, which is the way that many multinational corporations avoid profits. Over 100 countries in the world have already adopted transfer pricing mechanisms to deal with this problem. As I indicated, the implementation of the Gambling, Gaming and Betting Control Bill after appropriate consultation. We shall provide incentives for CCTV and alarm systems. We believe that persons should be encouraged to look after their own personal security. This was something touted by the previous administration, but as happened with many of their initiatives, they didn't take it to the final stage. So they got bogged down in the specifications required for CCTV and alarm systems. As a result, the thing just dragged on and on and on to the point where we are now, where nothing has been done. We know that the specifications for CCTV, not difficult, it's not rocket science, and we will be finalizing these specifications within the next couple months so that we can allow tax and duty exemptions for CCTV systems, thereby encouraging people to install these in their homes. We've also want to start the dialogue on the fuel subsidy, because the fuel subsidy has reached as high as $4 billion in some years when the price of oil was over $80. And we think it's time for the country to talk. Should we be spending $3 billion or $4 billion, or as the case may be in this year with oil at 45, $1.7 billion on a fuel subsidy, rather than directing that money towards targeted programs to help the poor and the indigent. So we decided to increase the price of super gasoline and diesel by just 15% to start the ball rolling. And we will have a national conversation on this to determine whether those billions of dollars that are spent in the fuel subsidy, my memory tells me we spent almost $20 billion over the last 5 years on the fuel subsidy, whether that could be better spent elsewhere, on healthcare, on education, as the case may be. We also have to make adjustments to the national insurance system based on the 9th actuarial report, which should have been laid in this parliament by the last administration but was not, and it will be laid shortly. We must do this, otherwise the national insurance system will run out of money within a few years. We're also increasing another manifesto promise increasing the cap on joint incomes earned by retirees in respect of national insurance and old age pension by $500. Again, this was a promise we made to be implemented within the first 12 months. We've done it within the first month. Creation of a retirees benefit program. For those of you who have gone to Panama, you will see how they treat their retirees. They give them discounts on so many things. And we have decided initially to provide free driver's permits and passports to retirees over the age of 60. And then we'll continue with this program to see what discounts we can give to retirees in addition to free driver's permits and passports. We also thought that for young people, we would assist them by increasing the stipend paid to participants in the on-the-job training program. There have been a lot of complaints that those stipends are inadequate. We've decided to increase them by 20%. We're also creating a graduate recruitment program. There's so many unemployed graduates, people with first-class honors. I know quite a few myself. People have qualified in petroleum geoscience and so on, with first-class honors, who are walking the streets of Trinidad and Tobago today because they're simply unemployed because of the downturn in the oil economy and the collapse in oil prices. We felt that in every ministry, we'd create this graduate program, which is a specialized program. So in the Ministry of Finance, we'll be looking for accountants and economists. In energy, we're looking for people, petroleum engineers and petroleum geoscientists. In education, we're looking for people with specialized training in education and so on. And this is part of a professional development program. It's very different from OJT. These people will be selected for their excellence in their academic achievements, for their all-around skills and so on, and be part of a professional development program. We're going to recruit in the first instance 500 university graduates, approximately 20 per ministry, and some for Tobago. We intend to exempt all taxes and duties on all inputs into the agricultural sector, and I will leave my colleagues in agriculture to deal with that. I've heard so much old talk about, oh, that is there already. It's just not true. You speak to a farmer, you don't get customs duty off of agricultural vehicles. You don't get motor vehicle tax off of agricultural vehicles. All you get is VAT. And it's a refund system where you have to pay the VAT, then get it back over, claim it back over a 3-year period. And of course, when they said that they had done this already, it's just not true. This was done after direct discussions with farmers. I spoke to them myself. I spoke to fishermen. I spoke to farmers. I asked, what do you want? And they said one of the first things they want is all taxes and duties off of all inputs to agriculture. We also will be providing financial autonomy for the judiciary. Over the next year, we'll be speaking with them to work out a mechanism where you can hand over all of the procurement, the responsibility for the construction of judicial buildings, the acquisition of goods and services, hand it over completely to the judiciary within a framework of checks and balances. So finally, the judiciary will get what they've been asking for so many years. And Madam President, that's a brief summary. I would leave my colleagues in this Honorable Senate to give details and to flesh out many of the plans and programs of the People's National Government, People's National Movement Government. All I would say is that I am honored to be given the portfolio of Minister of Finance. I wish to thank all of my colleagues. I wish to thank the Honorable Prime Minister, the Honorable Keith Rowley, for having the confidence in me to give me this responsibility. And I give an undertaking to all citizens of Trinidad and Tobago that I will do my best to serve everyone equally without fear or favor as we put our economy back on a path to recovery and growth. I thank you, Madam Speaker. I beg to move.
Honourable Senators, I shall now propose the question for debate. The question is that a bill entitled, An Act to Provide for the Service of Trinidad and Tobago for the financial year ending on the 30th day of September 2016 be now read a second time. Before allowing other senators to join the debate, I just want to remind everyone that in accordance with Standing Order 43.1, a senator can speak for a maximum of 40 minutes. There are no extensions. And what I will do is indicate to senators when they are within the 5 minutes of the impended expiration of the allotted time. Senator Mark.
Thank you. Madam President, allow me to once again congratulate you on your ascension to the office of President of the Senate. And may I take the opportunity in his absence to welcome our new Minister of Finance and to congratulate him on his assumption to this very critical office. Madam President, if I may quote Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi when he said, "It is not which side of the fence that you are on that matters. What is important is the quality of the contribution that one makes towards the nation." Madam President, given the far-reaching and complex nature of the budget, and given the obvious time constraint, as you have identified, I would like to focus my contribution on the following themes. The fiscal measure proposed by this intellectually bankrupt and overwhelmingly incompetent administration, the negative impact of these austerity measures, the impact of the fiscal measures on labor and the working class, the likely effect of these measures on escalating crime, public safety and security, procurement, the pernicious property tax and the dreaded revenue authority, highlights of the energy sector, and the way forward. Madam President, the 2016 budget is littered and punctuated with endless distortions, many fabrications, wild allegations, hysterical rambling, half-truths, and massive deception. Many of the fiscal measures are designed to begin a process of redistribution of income, wealth, resources, and power in favor of the rich and powerful and away from the weak, voiceless, and powerless in our society. We in the People's Partnership have nothing against the rich. We stand for equity, justice, and social progress for all. The budget is filled with deceptive rhetoric and double standards. It is dangerously misleading. It is an illusion wrapped in the gift of superficiality, and it is nothing more than a massive mamagai by this minority administration. The 2016 budget is predicated on recommendations, which the minister failed to mention, emanating from a private meeting between the government of Trinidad and Tobago and the International Monetary Fund, held at the request of the government of our country after the last general election. Madam President, they just did not know what to do. They were totally devoid of ideas as to how to manage and grow this economy. Stringent and draconian IMF austerity measures constituted the foundation of the 2016 fiscal package. By the minister's own admission, he stated, and I quote, "They provided me," that is the IMF, "with their own assessment as well as their own solutions." Is the Honorable Minister of Finance prepared to share this assessment and those solutions proposed by the IMF with this Honorable House? Remember, Madam President, this is the same IMF who in 1986 prescribed the 10% cut across the board in public expenditure, thereby impoverishing large sections of the working class in our country. The minister further confessed that after these consultations with the IMF, he was now better informed of the true state of the economy. He went on to state, and I quote, that our economy is in a more perilous state than we envisaged. In fact, the expert with whom he consulted firmly recommended the implementation of several draconian measures supposedly designed to generate a revival in growth and more resources, and will also redound to the benefit of our children and future generation, according to the minister. Nothing could be more deceptive and devious. What were these measures? You know what they were, Madam President? A property tax, broadening of the VAT base, increasing the excise tax, increasing personal income tax, increasing corporation tax, eliminating the fuel subsidies, reducing other subsidies and transfers, and introducing wage and hiring restraint mechanisms. Madam President, these are classical IMF-inspired austerity measures and solutions that, according to the minister, is supposed to generate and revive growth. Is this not intellectual dishonesty on the part of the minister, I ask, Madam President? Indeed, these stringent and anti-people measures will ultimately lead not only to a severe contraction in the economy, but loss of jobs, price increases, wage freezes, and possible salary cuts, increased capital flight, increased poverty, decrease in foreign direct investment inflows, human capital flight, increased poverty, a surge in crime, and an increase in social instability, particularly among the poor and the vulnerable. Has the minister conveniently forgotten, Madam President, the fraud perpetrated on this country by this very IMF during 1985, 86, and 87, when it was proved by a reputable institution such as the World Bank and the University of the West Indies that the statistical manipulation and misrepresentation of critical indicators of our economy by the IMF aimed at imposing austerity measures which were more stringent than necessary had a debilitating effect on the country as a whole. It is said, Madam President, that those who forget the mistakes of the past are doomed to repeat them. Madam President, I now turn to fiscal package. Following on the heels of the raft of austerity and draconian measures, which were clearly misdiagnosed based on the statistical misrepresentation and manipulation of the data. The poor, the dispossessed, the voiceless, and the powerless citizens have been negatively impacted. It is clear that the finance minister's incorrect fiscal measures will lead to inflation manifested in higher prices, slowing down of existing business activity, create greater hardship for the poor, and will cause the existing exchange rate to even depreciate in the short term. Madam President, the rise in fuel costs will trigger increases across the board in the final products, especially the prices of basic food items. It will negatively affect private car owners, taxi drivers, small-scale transport businesses, and single mothers facing high grocery bills. As a matter of fact, Madam President, it will have a dreadful impact on every single person in this country. The inflationary impact of the fiscal measures will also result in a real fall in the minimum wage. One economist at the University of the West Indies has already predicted that the real minimum wage would be reduced from $15 per hour to $10 per hour as a result of the government's inflationary fiscal package. Single mothers, unskilled workers, and those persons living close to the poverty line will be impacted negatively by this erosion of the minimum wage. The taxing of zero-rated and exempt VAT items will cause business to increase their prices, forcing the consumer to pay higher prices for such items. This represents an absolute reversal and repudiation of the policies of a former administration. All goods and services in the second schedule of the VAT Act are likely to be affected by this backward and anti-people measure. The Minister of Finance has indicated that it is the intention of the government to sell the family jewels in order to make up the revenue to balance the nation's budget. The country would like to know from him which state assets are to be disposed of by this new government. What will be the impact of these fire sales of state assets on employment, loss of income, family life, and the future of our children? I now turn to public safety and national security. In spite of the strategic misinformation on the allocation of $10.8 billion to national security, has been the highest since independence. An in-depth analysis of various policy documents on public order and safety is manifestly misleading, if not fraudulent. Madam President, there is an absence of strategic and tactical initiatives to stem the rising tide of homicides, kidnappings, border integrated capability, and efficient resource allocation. Given the need for increased border protection in light of the growing drug trade and the poor rate of crime detection, particularly in the area of homicides, why have the resources allocated for the training of the K9 units been reduced or eliminated? For example, under the PNM 2016 Development Program for the Ministry of National Security, there is no allocation for the construction of dormitory and messing facilities for the Coast Guard in Cedros for 2016, as well as the absence of any allocation for the establishment of a Coast Guard base at Charlottesville in Tobago. Nothing about these has been mentioned in their 2016 budget. The Commissioner of Police has been literally crying out for border protection improvement to assist in stemming the inflows of illegal guns and drugs into the country and human trafficking. Yet the government in its 2016 budget has failed to provide the necessary resources for crime fighting and public safety and security in strategic locations throughout the country. In the draft estimates of recurrent expenditure for Trinidad and Tobago Police Service 2016, under the heading Minor Equipment Purchases, there is a sizable reduction in the allocation for the purchase of vehicles, rent lease of vehicles, and equipment and maintenance of vehicles for the police service, as well as a reduction in the allocation for the training of members of the police service. For example, reductions for the purchase of vehicles and maintenance of vehicles are in the vicinity of $15 million and $21.8 million, respectively. There is also, Madam President, no allocation of revenue for the regiment for the purchase of vehicles and equipment for critical border duties and functions. The Minister of National Security tells the nation that crime is the #1 priority of his government, yet the resources necessary to provide vital security and safety are absent. In addition, reference is made to the police service on page 33 of the budget statement, in which the Minister of Finance has stated his intention to modernize the service by establishing a police management agency with a mandate to develop the necessary leadership expertise, skills, and professionalism, as well as a police service inspectorate to treat with potential abuse of state power and any overreach by the police service in the discharge of their duties. These agencies seem to be a duplication of existing ones, such as the Police Complaints Authority and the Police Training Academy. What is the real purpose and aim of these agencies? Madam President, it appears that the government is seeking to introduce mechanisms designed to influence and ultimately control the executive of the police service and to bring it under its total control. This is highly dangerous and unacceptable. As an independent organization, especially in the area of operations, it is highly dangerous for the politicians to be using mechanisms and devices to influence the behavior, the conduct, and direction of the executive of the police service, and at the same time introducing its own sanctions to punish errant police officers who may abuse or overreach their authority and power. These are matters for the Police Complaints Authority, the Police Commission, Police Service Commission, and the Police Commissioner. These two agencies are designed, as far as we are concerned, to undermine and compromise the Commissioner of Police and his executive, and allow agents of the PNM government through these agencies to seek to control this particular coercive arm of the state. Madam President, this is outrageous, it is scandalous and dangerous and must never be supported. We call on the government to leave the Commissioner of Police alone and to leave the Police Service Commission alone. I now turn to labor and the working class. Labor and the working class are expected to suffer serious dislocation and serious distress as IMF-inspired austerity measures take firm roots in the next 12 months and beyond. Unemployment and underemployment are expected to rise as the national economy contracts and slows in the wake of the application of these painful measures. Madam President, as I mentioned earlier in my contribution, valuable, strategic, and sensitive state assets will be subject to a fire sale as the government scrambles to close the revenue and expenditure gap. Prized state assets, possibly Prt1, Trinidad, National Flour Mills, TSTT, First Citizens Bank, National Gas Company, National Petroleum, National Energy Corporation, even the Port Authority, among others, could be placed on the chopping block for privatization. Let the minister explain to us which enterprises are to be sold. Further, a policy of wage freeze, wage reduction, and even retrenchment may be vigorously pursued by this administration in an effort to balance the books. A program of rationalization and structural adjustment will visit the public service in its broadest context as the regime seeks to pursue what it perceives to be efficiency gains. Many social programs within the current safety net will simply be cut and or removed, putting severe pressures on the most vulnerable in our society. Several of the fiscal measures, inclusive of increasing the prices of super, gasoline, and diesel, would also negatively impact the working class and erode their real wages, thereby reducing their living and working conditions. Madam President, workers and their families will also suffer from higher food prices, as the government seeks to increase its VAT take from 6.7 billion in 2015 to 12.4 billion in 2016, an increase of some $5.7 billion through a reduction, they claim, from 15% to 12.5%. This, according to the Director of Tax at the KPMG, would be an astounding accomplishment on the part of this administration. It is expected that several thousands of zero-rated and exempt items will now attract, effective from the 1st of January, a 12.5% VAT where none existed before. We want the minister to tell the country the truth on these matters. In the coming period, Madam President, the government will have no option, possibly, but to depreciate the value of the TT dollar vis-a-vis the US dollar. Any such move will witness an escalation in the cost of living, further eroding the income of the working people of our country. I now turn to procurement. The pernicious property tax and the dreaded revenue authority. At the heart of the government's proposal for infrastructural development is the urgent need for proper procurement legislation. Simply put, Madam President, before the government could engage in any major infrastructural program, they must ensure that procurement legislation is firmly and fully operationalized. In the absence of proper procurement legislation, we in the People's Partnership will strongly resist any attempt at engaging in major infrastructural projects, including the so-called US $10 billion rapid rail project. The People's Partnership calls on the government to immediately proclaim the procurement legislation in its entirety as passed by the Parliament. We are not interested in any review or watering down of any provision of the procurement legislation. Implement the law as it was enacted by the Parliament. The people of Trinidad and Tobago did not expect the reintroduction, Madam President, of this pernicious property tax. This is a regressive tax and will negatively affect business entities, pensioners who own property, young persons planning to purchase properties, and existing homeowners. The consequences of the reintroduction of the property tax will witness buildings being abandoned, rent increasing, increasing mortgage rates, rising utility bills, and a fall in renovations and repair to properties and general maintenance. Madam President, what additional services can citizens expect to receive from this new venture? And will the government share with this Senate what remedies it intends to employ if citizens are unable or unwilling to pay? The dreaded Revenue Authority. Studies have shown that the cost of operating revenue authorities in advanced and emerging economies are very high. And there is no guarantee, Madam President, that revenue authorities will be more efficient and effective in revenue collection. The reintroduction of the Revenue Authority will negatively impact upon workers who will be displaced and therefore become unemployed. We reject outright the introduction of a revenue authority and stand fully and firmly behind the workers of the Board of Inland Revenue, the VAT Office, the Customs and Excise Department, and any other revenue collecting agencies. Madam President, in 2010, the concept of a property tax was resoundingly rejected by the population, to the extent that the then government lost the general elections. So here we are, 5 years later, back to the future.
If we have a minute?
No, you will
Okay,
speak at the appropriate time. Madam President, on October the 5th, 2010, the Minister of Finance predicated his budget on the projected oil price of US $45 US, a mixed gas price to reflect prevailing market conditions, inclusive of Henry Hub, US 2.75 per MMBTU, and Indonesia, US $8 per MMBTU. We were further advised that revenue collection from oil companies in the fiscal year ending September 30, 2015, stood at $13 billion, some $8 billion less than was budgeted. However, in his budget documents, the minister has projected revenues from oil at $3.245 billion, but in his budget statement, projected oil revenues at $5.449 billion for fiscal 2016. Madam President, in a Guardian story dated Thursday, October the 15th, 2015, Prt1 chairman, one Mr. Andrew Jupiter, warned that the state-owned company may soon go out of business due to increasing debt, low productivity levels, escalating manpower costs, rising company debt, which stands, as we speak, at some $13.28 billion, with a US $850 million bond payable due in August of 2019. Prt1 management has indicated plans for a voluntary separation program in which thousands of workers may be separated. On that same date and in that same newspapers, the Minister of Finance provided the country with new optimism insofar as oil prices are concerned. According to the Honorable Minister, global experts, including the World Bank, the IMF, the Economic Intelligence Unit, the OECD, have all projected favorable oil price increases averaging around $65 in 16 and 17, 2016 and 17. Now, this is only a mere 10 days after the minister's budget projection of US $45 per barrel. Madam President, the question that is dripping from the lips of a perplexed population is exactly what is going on with our Minister of Finance. When did our distinguished Minister of Finance accidentally stumble upon these optimistic forecasts for crude oil increases? The nation has been stunned and flabbergasted by these latest revelations. But should we be, Madam President? How does the minister's optimistic outlook squares up with that of the International Energy Agency, which is predicting a slowing down in the world demand for oil in 2016, given the pessimistic outlook for the global economy and the expected arrival of Iranian crude should international sanctions be eased? I think the minister should stop playing psychological games with the minds of the people. Madam President, an objective analysis of the 2016 fiscal package has revealed an uneven distribution of government's IMF-inspired austerity measures. It has placed the bulk of the adjustment burdens on the shoulders of those who are least able to bear or carry them. Both the foreign multinational corporations as well as big and medium-sized domestic businesses have been engaged in what the minister has said in an unhealthy practice aimed at exploiting loopholes in the Treaty of Chaguaramas, which have permitted them to establish subsidiaries or branches in CARICOM territories which serve as virtual tax havens. These loopholes have prevented these corporations and business organizations from paying their share of corporation taxes and other taxes, which could conservatively be estimated to amount to hundreds of millions of dollars, if not billions of dollars, that we have lost. These multinational corporations and national business entities continue to enjoy, Madam President, generous incentives, concessions, and low utility rates, while denying the state and the citizens their fair share of corporation taxes and other tax obligations. The Minister of Finance has stated his intention to plug the significant leakage in our revenue stream by constraining these multinationals from employing transfer pricing mechanisms, inclusive of moving transactions to lower tax jurisdictions with lower tax rates through the introduction of transfer pricing legislation. We look forward to the government tabling in this Parliament the appropriate legislation to plug that significant leakage in our revenue stream, Madam President. The time has come for the nation to engage in an equitable and fair distribution of the burdens of adjustment, in which every stakeholder should carry a fair share of the fiscal adjustment burden. Madam President, a social compact involving labor, business, government, and civil society is urgently needed in our country. This mechanism is necessary if we are to ensure that the draconian austerity measures
Senator
are
Mark.
not unevenly,
Senator Mark, you have 5 more minutes.
thank you, are not unevenly distributed the fundamental players in our society. And therefore, Madam President, we call on the government to allow this country to develop its own national, economic, and social development strategy, and not have powerful interest-driven global financial institutions impose their will and prescription on our sovereign democratic republic and its glorious people. Madam President, I have sought in the few moments or minutes allotted me to put on the public record some pressing issues concerning the working people and relating to fiscal measures, the negative impact of these measures, some issues relating to public safety, crime and national security, procurement, the pernicious property tax, and the dreaded revenue authority. I looked at some highlights of the energy sector and transfer pricing. Clearly, Madam President, this government does not have a clue as to what is required to manage and grow this economy. They are devoid of ideas, as evidenced by their rush to seek IMF advice, remembering always that it was the same IMF who utilized manipulated statistics to justify severe impositions on the citizens of this country that proved totally unnecessary to our circumstances in the final analysis. In closing, may I share with you and this Honorable Senate, as I open, a pertinent quotation as I end. It is from one Chris Jamais, and he states, and I quote, just because something is not a lie does not mean it is not deceptive. A liar knows that he's a liar, but one who speaks mere portions of truth in order to deceive is a craftsman of destruction. Madam President, I thank you.
Senator Shrikissoon.
Thank you, Madam President. Let me first thank you for allowing me the opportunity to put forward my contribution with respect to the Appropriations Bill of 2015 for financial year 2016. As I begin, I would like to congratulate you on your appointment as President of this Honourable House, a position which brings with it great honour, recognition and responsibility. In keeping in the congratulatory spirit, I would also like to extend sincerest congratulations to the Minister of Finance and his team for being able to unveil the fiscal package for 2016 a mere 28 days after election. By any standards, it is a remarkable feat. What makes this feat even more outstanding is that given the reduced period of preparation, the Minister and his team were still able to meet with key stakeholder groups whose opinions influenced the fiscal package of 2015-2016. After listening to the Honourable Minister's presentation, there are certain areas which he highlighted that I would like to see as a citizen of Trinidad and Tobago and a member of this House I was particularly pleased with. While I would have preferred a report revealing a more positive economic position for Trinidad and Tobago, I was grateful that the Honourable Minister did provide an overview of the state of the Trinidad and Tobago's economy. While some may present different interpretations of these figures or indicators, the figures reveal that management of Trinidad and Tobago's economy needs urgent attention and a collective response to fiscal prudence. It is in my view that the people of Trinidad and Tobago are better informed of our economic climate, which can guide our decision-making while having realistic expectations. Second, amidst falling revenue, I was heartened by the Minister's conscious effort to reduce expenditure to a level less than that of 2014-2015, with the liability on personal expenditure being the sole reason for total expenditure to surpass 2015. Other areas of strength that I would like to commend the Minister for are his conscious effort to reduce the fuel subsidy, the largest allocation to crime and national security, which demonstrates that it is a problem that is affecting us both socially and economically. The consideration of granting financial autonomy to the judiciary, the increase in personal tax allowance, the establishment of an independent statistical office, and the strengthening and resourcing of all state institutions which play roles in funding, training, and developing markets for the small and medium enterprise sector. While there may be other areas of strength, these are the few that really stood out and that I thought was quite important to me. Madam President, as my presentation unfolds from this juncture, while the nominal values that I may use are of importance, I would like us to give some consideration to the general trend that we are developing. Madam President, our last fiscal surplus was recorded in 2008, having a value of $2,974.5 million. Subsequently, in each successive year after 2008, until 2015, as a country, we would have recorded continuous fiscal deficits. 2009, 6.6 billion. 2010, 2.8 billion. 2011, 2.3 billion. 2012, 4.5 billion. 2013, 6 billion. 2014, 4.4 billion. 2015, 7 billion. All fiscal deficits. And the pre-adjusted fiscal deficit for 2016, 21.4 billion. We have established fiscal deficits as our modus operandi and in terms of our fiscal packages for the last 8 years. Madam President, I feel the need to emphasize this point as if we are to sum the value of fiscal deficits 2009 to 2015, we would get a whopping value of 34 billion. That is to say, Madam President, that if we were to use 2016 funding to address the deficits created, we would have really been spending 80% of the revenue collected in 2016. This would only leave 20% of our revenue to deal with the matters of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. This situation is further exaggerated in 2016 with a fiscal deficit of 21.4 billion, 13% of GDP, the highest ever that I could recall. I would like to say at this juncture that we're all aware of the Greek financial crisis. And one of the fundamental factors that caused this or perpetuated this economic calamity in Greece was the fact that they've recorded persistent and continuous fiscal deficits. I ask at this juncture that we pay attention to our expenditure, and as our expenditure continues to exceed our revenue, our ability to earn revenue. As the Honourable Minister of Finance pointed out in his budget presentation, at the end of 2010, net public sector debt stood at 32.2% of GDP. By the end of 2014, 40.2%, and 2015, 46.3%. Again, I just want to remind, just look at the trend. While the values are important, the trend is very significant. At the end of 2015, total public debt was twice that of 2007, while revenues for the corresponding period only increased by a mere 45%. Our debt level doubled, while our revenue earning potential, or the revenue earned, was less than 50%, recorded less than 50% growth. One may argue that an increase in government spending is absolutely necessary for there to be economic growth. But the last 4 years, we have recorded relatively little movement or growth in our GDP. Then was it justified? It is for this reason that I did say earlier, nominal values are important, but the trends reveal more. We have to consider that we are in a period of declining revenues. We've seen that we're actually recording increased expenditure, continuous and increasing budget deficits, with one of the largest being recorded in 2016 before it's pre-adjusted. And we're seeing an increased debt level. Madam President, this runaway horse of expenditure must be captured and bridled if we as a nation are to return to positive economic growth supported with strong reserve balances and a reduced debt burden. Having now been confronted with the sharp reality that we are spending or consuming more than we are earning, there is the thrust now towards diversifying the Trinidad and Tobago's economy. But I would like to say that over the period 2009 or 2005 rather to 2015, we've seen significant contributions from the non-oil sector, playing a greater role in its contribution to GDP. In 2005, it was 40.5% contribution to GDP from the oil sector. But by 2015, it fell to 32.1%, indicating or indicative that the other areas of our economy was actually performing, contributing 67.4% of GDP at that time. The real question at this point in time is our economy diversified? And we're seeing various sectors of the economy demonstrating signs that they're stepping up. At this point, we want to evaluate the revenues that government would earn from oil revenue. And we're seeing that oil revenue for the government, which was its largest source of revenue, was actually falling at this point, or during this time period. In 2005, revenue for the government from the oil sector averaged just about 40.5%. But in 2015, it fell to 24.1% after it was adjusted, and in 2016, a mere 13%. The question, therefore, is as government is faced with a challenge of reduced revenue, we start to hear of an increased thrust towards diversification. It is almost as if the fall in government revenue is driving the need for diversification. And I'm saying today that that's not precisely what should be the case. I would like to say here that diversification is meant for building a sustainable economy and sustainable sectors. The government can benefit from revenues when those sectors are developed. I would like to say as well that the government having to look for alternative income streams to supplement its revenue does not equate, as I said, to diversification. I agree with the Minister of Finance with his thrust towards diversification and his suggestions and strategies with respect to the maritime economy as well as the International Financial Center. Establishment of an international financial center. But these are long-term strategies, and we require something more immediate now. I just want to recall from the budget the government's projected projects for northeast Trinidad. The construction of a Wallerfield to Manzanilla highway, a new first-class road between Valencia and Toco, a new fast ferry port in Toco, and which will all contribute to the opening of the entire northeast region of Trinidad and make available new industrial and commercial space. I'm excellent. I'm saying excellent. But what I'm saying is Trinidad and Tobago, if we look at our municipal corporations, we have 14 such geographical spaces. Why are we saying that? Why are we saying that this method of diversification should only be concentrated, or plans are only given for northeast Trinidad?
You want to give me? I tend to deal with that comprehensively when I deal with local government and what plans we have for the 14 municipal corporation in the context of that development trust.
I thank you, Honourable Senator. I look forward to the contribution. But I would like to say, as a citizen or as a resident of Princestown, I would like to see some areas of development for Princestown. And I would say to you that one of the reasons that Princestown is close to my heart is because there's where I reside and there's where I work. And I know that there are significant resources in Princestown that has remained relatively untapped. And in tapping those resources, we can actually improve the local economy or the sub-economy of Princestown. So I look forward to that contribution. What I would like to say as well here today with respect to the contribution of my contribution with respect to Trinidad and Tobago is that as a nation, if our diversification thrust needs to be successful, we as a nation must also be competitive. Madam President, as presented, our economy has been experiencing lower revenue generation prices. Our budget deficits are increasing. Diversification is being seen as a way forward for the economy. Yet, the Global Competitiveness Report defines competitiveness as a set of institutions, policies, and factors that determine the level of productivity of an economy, which in turn sets the level of prosperity that a country can earn. So there is a link between competitiveness, productivity, and prosperity. However, in the latest report of the Global Competitiveness Report, or Index, 2015-2016, out of 140 economies being analyzed, Trinidad and Tobago has been ranked 89th out of 140. In 2012, we were 84th. In 2013, we were 92nd. In 2014, we were 89th. And in 2015, we were again 89th, slipping from a position of 84th in 2012 and maintaining a position of 89th. 89 out of 140. We're seeking to diversify our economy. We need to be more competitive, but our competitiveness remains the same and in the lower half of the index. I would like to examine this index for a brief moment. It says that the Global Competitive Index identifies 12 pillars upon which an economy is evaluated into 3 subcategories: basic requirements, efficiency enhancers, and innovation and sophistication. I'd like to just look at basic requirements first. Let us remember that our ranking is 89th, so that any rank above 89 will be pulling our rank up. And any rank below 89 will be pushing our scores downward. Infrastructure, under basic requirements, infrastructure had a value of 51, or rank of 51. Macroeconomic environment, 54. Health and primary education, 60. These indicators would have been pulling our average up for basic requirements. But institutions, 108. What this 108 constituted at this point in time and pulling our average down, and I'm going to give you the factor and the score. Diversion of public funds falling under institutions, 124 out of 140. Public trust in politicians, that's us, 128. Irregular payments and bribes, 104. Favoritism and decisions of government officials, 137. Wastefulness of government spending, 112. Business costs of crime and violence, 136 out of 140. Organized crime, 117. Reliability of the police service, 116. Ethical behavior of firms, 125. Classed as basic requirements for competitiveness for Trinidad and Tobago. All indicators that I'm not very proud of today. There are other areas, such as the efficiency enhancers, the second category, and the one that stands out most there is the goods market efficiency, which has a rank of 104 out of 140. and the market size, which is 102. What is keeping our market efficiency down? Burden of customs procedures, 127. Degree of customer orientation, 137. Agricultural policy costs, 113. Trade, tariffs and duties, 122. All affecting our competitiveness. And the last area that the report looked at was innovation. Capacity to innovate, 106. Companies spending on R&D, 119. And the university industry collaboration in R&D, 105. Madam President, I'm saying today that if our economy is to progress, if it is to experience economic growth, we need to be more competitive. These indicators are saying that our nation and our competitiveness as a nation, we've not progressed over the last 4 to 5 years. And it is an area that we must address. In the contribution, under the category innovation, we looked at university-industry collaboration in R&D. And I just want to say here that we're seeing an increased expenditure on GATE, and we're hearing about a rationalizing of GATE expenditure for those who can afford and those who may not be able to afford. And that's okay. But I also want to suggest that one of the ways in which we can rationalize GATE is to determine the skill set that is required for the advancement of Trinidad and Tobago and fund those programs whether or not those students can afford it, yes or no. This would actually allow meaningful value to be derived from our educational system and the funding that's provided by GATE. Madam President, we have been stuck at the bottom of the competitive rankings. We have been stuck at the bottom of the competitiveness ranking for too long. And successive governments have left us here. I'm asking today from this bench that the present government assists and put policies in place to allow us to be able to at least move into the upper half of that index over the next 2 to 3 years. Financing the deficit. Madam President, having explored the need to diversify and improve our competitiveness, our economy is being most impacted by the need to become more competitive. But when we look at financing the deficit that the Honourable Minister has put forward, we're seeing here that there are approximately 200,000 small and medium-sized businesses in Trinidad and Tobago, employing in excess of 200,000 people, 1/3 of the workforce, and contributing more than 28% of GDP. The CSO estimates that small and medium-sized businesses constitute over 85% of all registered businesses in Trinidad and Tobago. Madam President, when we introduced these taxation measures as proposed in the by the Honourable Minister, a 300% increase in business levy, a 300% increase in the Green Fund levy, a reintroduction of the property tax at all rates until revised. We're saying that these measures can have a direct impact on the number of, or on the small and medium-sized businesses which dominate which constitute the majority of businesses in Trinidad and Tobago. Let's examine the Green Fund levy. According to the Miscellaneous Taxes Act, Chapter 7701, Part 14, the purpose of the Green Fund is to provide financial assistance to community groups and organizations for activities related to reforestation, remediation, environmental education, public awareness of the environmental issues, and conservation of the environment. Madam President, today we're seeing the possibility of the increase in Green Fund going towards meeting recurrent expenditure. This is not in alignment with the law which governs Green Fund. Business levy. We're seeing a 300% increase in business levy from 0.2% to 0.6%. But again, as the Minister rightly pointed out, business levy is not an income earning tax by itself. It's a prepayment by corporations which we get a credit for against corporation tax at the end of the year. So whatever business levy you pay during the year is deducted from your corporation tax due. So then, by increasing business levy, we're not really increasing taxation or revenue. We're actually offsetting it by the tax credit to be derived later on from corporation tax. It is in this light that I would like to say that the revenue projected to be earned from the increase in business levy may not actually materialize. The issue here is that the funds were directed towards dealing with the fiscal deficit. If it is not realized, the fiscal deficit remains exposed. Again, VAT. VAT has been decreased from 15% to 12.5%. My challenge here is to understand, why did we increase business levy? Why did we increase Green Fund levy, but we sought to decrease VAT? I know that there may have been alternative reasons, but what I'm saying is, in a time or at a time when revenue generation and earning is important and critical for Trinidad and Tobago, we would have reduced a particular tax for which the country is comfortable with since its inception. So I'm asking here, with respect to VAT, although there was a $4 billion projected increase in VAT revenue, if this decrease in VAT does not bring about the quantum of revenue to be derived, $4 billion represents roughly 20% of the fiscal deficit. Therefore, if it is not fully derived, the fiscal deficit remains exposed again. To touch on another point with respect to the sale of assets program, I'm a bit concerned about this, and I want to use the dividends that the government receives from NGC as the example. We're seeing use of dividends to be derived from NGC for funding recurrent or current expenditure. The dividends is the payback to government for the investment made in the past. And the government is entitled to use that dividend whichever way they choose, because that's their return on investment. And I'm okay with that. The challenge I'm having here is with the IPO that was released. Here it is, we're seeing that the government raising revenue from an IPO. And we're seeing here that as the funds are raised from the energy sector, the sector that requires investment, the sector where declining revenues are being experienced, the sectors that we need to develop, we're consuming the entire capital raised from that sector for current expenditure. In years to come, there would be no benefit from this money that was actually raised from this IPO.
Excellent point.
So we're actually consuming the potential for, exactly, eating our capital, as Dr. Dan would say. Very much concerned. With respect to CLICO, we're seeing the sale of assets being used to fund the current expenditure. May I remind this Honourable House that the government of Trinidad and Tobago incurred significant debt in this bailout plan, and to use the revenue to be derived from assets and not putting it in place to offset the debt that has to be repaid into the future is a dangerous precedent which leaves our debt level higher and not addressed. It's important that we do so. As I come to the end of my presentation, two issues that I must address and I must speak of. It's the labor issues and foreign exchange reserve position of Trinidad and Tobago. Trinidad and Tobago enjoys a low unemployment rate of less than 5%. But at this low levels of employment, the majority of the business sector is starved for workers. So we're seeing here a low unemployment rate, but the business sector is starved for labor. This situation clearly retards investment. What is alarming in this case, over the past years, we're seeing increase in expenditure on programs such as CPEP and URP. In this budget, there wasn't anything explicit on that issue, so we await the government's response to see how we can take this labor portfolio away from those products and programs and incorporate it into our productive sector. With respect to foreign exchange, I commend the Minister for intervening and at least going back to an old distribution system that could somehow, in some way, ease the burden of the supply of foreign exchange. What I'm concerned with, though, is the demand created for foreign exchange in Trinidad. We know that the manufacturing sector, the business sector, requires foreign exchange, and they must be prioritized. But on an October 1st edition of the Business Guardian, Mr. Ramesh Ramdeen, CEO of TTMA, reports foreign credit card purchases devouring $570 million for the year so far. This excludes Cyber Monday and upcoming Christmas purchases. In the last year, $530 million. $1 billion over 2 years. This practice is saying that as individuals, as consumers, we are consuming $1.6 million US per day via online transactions. What is worse about this is that this is technically an import and can have a negative impact on the economy. So while the supply of foreign exchange is important, we need to consider the demand that we create for foreign exchange. Financial autonomy. I would also like to commend the Honourable Minister of Finance for giving consideration to the financial autonomy of the judiciary. I am sure that this financial autonomy will improve the efficiency of the administration of justice in Trinidad and Tobago. It is in my view, should there be earlier crime detection by the police service, coupled with greater efficiency in the administration of justice, the possibility of reduced crime can occur, as this can in itself be a prohibition for people who choose to engage in this act. So we're seeing here that this financial autonomy can bring about effectiveness in the judiciary, independence of the judiciary, not compromised, and being effective. Our Constitution allows us to recognize 3 arms of government: the executive, the judiciary, and the legislature. The executive being the government's cabinet. And we're seeing here that the government has financial autonomy, and that's why we're here, to debate the issues. We're now seeing that financial autonomy given to the judiciary, and I applaud the initiative. What I would like to suggest today is that our head of state, office of the president, remains under the supervisory control of the government. In keeping with independence, in keeping with the effectiveness of performing duties, I would like to suggest that financial autonomy also be considered for the office of the president. Madam Speaker, as I close, I would just like to summarize. 1, the need to restrict expenditure so as to reduce continuous financial deficits. 2, the immediate examination of our country's debt profile and our ability to service our obligations. 3, the need to diversify an economy, not just to meet government expenditure, but to build a sustainable economy within all sectors. 4, care needs to be given to the use of the Green Fund, as we are violating the law which governs the use of these funds. 5, business levy may not bring in the projected revenue, as this is a tax credit against corporation tax. Lowering of VAT may not earn all of the additional revenue the minister has projected. And our prosperity in our nation lies at the heart of productivity. Production is actually one of our watchwords. Our capacity to produce is directly impacted on our competitiveness. Can we strive to make our nation more competitive? The demand for foreign exchange, not only the supply, must be managed. Labor shortages, especially among small and medium-sized enterprises, must be addressed. The budget report, budget statement 2016, only really paid attention to labor at a macro level and not a micro level. And to the government of Trinidad and Tobago, my humble suggestion of please consider financial autonomy for the office of the President. With these few words, I thank you, Madam President.
Senator Dookie.
Thank you very much, Madam President. It is a privilege for me to have the opportunity to participate in this debate. And let me also take the opportunity to offer to you my congratulations on your appointment as President of the Senate, and of course to congratulate my colleague, Senator De Freitas, on his appointment to the office of Vice President of the Senate. Madam President, I had the pleasure of listening to the Honorable Minister of Finance in both houses. And I would like to describe the structure of his presentation as an artist painting a picture. He began to paint a picture of where we came from. And as he continued his portrait, he painted a picture of where we are. And as he engaged his presentation, he painted a picture of where this government would like to take Trinidad and Tobago. And he also painted a picture of how we are going to get there. And as he painted this picture, Madam President, of where we came from, the picture seemed very unattractive. But he continued his painting, highlighting where we are today, and the unattractiveness seemed more glaring. But Madam President, as he continued to paint a picture of where we are going as a nation, the portrait began to look beautiful. And as he highlighted in his painting of his budget picture, how we are going to get there, Madam President, I felt optimistic. I felt happy. Because what started off as a painting that was unattractive ended up as a beautiful portrait of Trinidad and Tobago. Over the next few minutes, Madam President, I would like to engage in some details regarding where we came from, where we are today, where we are going, and how we are going to get there. As I examine the period 2010 to 2015, where we came from, I would like to state, Madam President, that corruption, wastage, inefficiency, and in particular, deliberate inefficiency is a multi-billion-dollar business enterprise designed to benefit those who have masterminded. And Madam President, I can describe where we came from, as indeed the Honorable Minister of Finance did in his presentation, 2010 to 2015, as a period of corruption, wastage, inefficiency, and deliberate inefficiency. And Madam President, that leads us to where we are today, when you examine our current condition as an economy. The Honorable Minister of Finance indeed highlighted it. The challenges we face with major balance of payment deficits, a loss in our official reserves, increased fiscal deficit amounting previously to 4.2% of GDP, arrears in relation to wage settlement, cash flow challenges, Madam President,
cash balances challenges, increases in our public sector debt. And Madam President, what this means for this new government is to put into action prudent measures to bring about a balanced budget by the year 2018 as articulated by the Honorable Minister of Finance. And Madam President, one would understand that given our current conditions, the Minister of Finance would have had to address certain aspects in his fiscal package. And as he began to articulate where we would like to go as a nation in terms of bringing about fiscal prudence, he addressed the areas of revenue collection and the elimination of wastage, corruption, and inefficiency through the mechanism of institutional strengthening. And he highlighted, Madam President, a number of areas or institutions in which he would like to take us in terms of using the dynamics of these institutions to bring about fiscal prudence. And he touched on a few. But before I get into a couple of them, Madam President, let me state that we have witnessed a breakdown in our institutions over the last few years. And we have seen the interference of independent institutions over the last few years by crooked politicians. And Madam President, every attempt has to be made to enhance our institutions as a means of development. And I dare say, Madam President, interfering with these independent institutions should result in severe penalties. Michael Porter, Madam President, the world's renowned expert, one of in the areas of competitiveness and strategy, said in his work that even though you may have the right macroeconomic fundamentals and microeconomic fundamentals, if you don't have effective and strong institutions that provide an enabling environment, your competitiveness as a nation could be eroded. And he further argues, Madam President, that nations don't really compete. It is firms who compete. And it is the competitiveness of firms that nations rely on to improve the nation's overall competitive position. And Madam President, in this regard, I would like to focus a little bit on two measures, or maybe three, that the Honorable Minister of Finance articulated as a means of taking us to where we want to go as a nation and to bring about fiscal prudence. On one side, Madam President, I would like to address the area of revenue collection, and on the other, I would like to address the area of the elimination of wastage and mismanagement. I heard the Honorable Member, Senator Mark, spoke about the high cost of operating revenue authorities. But I also heard him said, Madam President, as he referred to a quotation from someone, that oftentimes when you speak a portion of the truth, oftentimes the intention is to deceive. And Madam President, Senator Mark highlighted from my recollection one point about revenue authorities, and he focused on the cost of operating such authorities. But Madam President, when you engage literature, you would come to note that autonomous revenue authorities, ARAs, are fundamental institutions in the developmental agenda of nations. And Madam President, it is part of what is now referred to as new public management. And the government of Trinidad and Tobago is taking this nation into the era of new public management. It is not just about how much, but it is also about how. And revenue authorities, according to literature, Madam President, as an objective, focus on getting the taxpayer to comply voluntarily. In doing so, Madam President, it is important for the Minister of Finance, as he did, to determine what is the tax potential of Trinidad and Tobago. And he would have compared that, Madam President, with what we actually would have collected. And in doing so, he would have identified the tax gap. And he is articulating the view, Madam President, that our tax potential is significantly greater than the level of taxes we collect as a nation. And he also, Madam President, in a solution, is articulating the view that the Revenue Authority may be the best intervention to eliminate that gap, to close the gap between what we can potentially collect as opposed to what we are actually collecting, Madam President. And Madam President, literature teaches us that revenues authorities have been very effective in closing, if not eliminating, the tax gap. But he did more than that, Madam President. He spoke about the need to incorporate the informal economy into the formal economy. Oftentimes, Madam President, in the developing world, the informal economy is larger than the formal economy. And the Minister of Finance is articulating the view through the operations and functioning of the Revenue Authority that incorporating the informal economy into the informal economy can increase our tax performance. So, Madam President, when you look at literature and you examine the benefits and the effectiveness of ARAs, autonomous revenue authorities that are independent, some of the objectives in terms of that particular intervention includes building trust between government and citizens, instituting fair and equitable systems of taxation. And those two together, Madam President, help to improve our tax performance. And if we can agree, Madam President, that our tax performance is our dependent variable, we can hypothesize that autonomous revenue authority significantly improves tax administration. Found in literature, Madam President, hypothesis proven. You can also hypothesize, Madam President, that ARAs significantly improves voluntary participation by taxpayers, Madam President. Again, found in literature, proven hypothesis. You could also hypothesize, Madam President, that voluntary participation significantly improves tax performance. You can also hypothesize that in developing countries, the informal economy is oftentimes larger than the formal economy. And further, Madam President, you can hypothesize that bringing the informal economy into the tax system significantly improves your tax performance. And therefore, Madam President, we can conclude that the Honorable Minister of Finance is focusing on institutional strengthening. In this case, Madam President, the advent of the Revenue Authority as an intervention that will improve the tax performance of Trinidad. And I've heard, Madam President, a number of arguments regarding property tax as I'm on the issue of tax. I think Senator Mark described it as a regressive tax. But I don't think that is a fair assessment, Madam President. And I wish to state, Madam President, that the rationale for property tax is a benefit principle. I wish to restate that, Madam President. The rationale for property tax is a benefit principle, not a cost principle or a cost disadvantage. And literature teaches us, Madam President, that property tax accounts as a source of major revenue for local government authorities. In the developed world, it accounts between 40 to 80% of local government revenue, or 0.5 to 4% of GDP. And in the developing world, Madam President, just 0.5% of GDP, or a maximum of 40% of local government revenue. But Madam President, I said it is a benefit principle because the revenue gained, Madam President, from this type of taxation is used to enhance the lives of the citizens of its country. I think I should restate that. It is a benefit principle, Madam President. And the revenues gained from this type of tax is used to provide services to the people of the country and hence improve the quality of their lives. And Madam President, if you examine it, you have to look at the outlay versus the benefit received. Accordingly, Madam President, when you look at the potential benefits that property tax revenues are used to provide in terms of servicing communities, you often find, as found in literature, that one of the benefits that this type of tax provide, and that is in the context, Madam President, of using the revenue to provide services, is that it increases the property values of citizens of the country. And Madam President, you can hypothesize that property tax is a fair and equitable tax, supported in literature, Madam President. You could also hypothesize further that property tax enhances the living standards of citizens. And you can further hypothesize, Madam President, that the services funded by property tax increase the value of properties owned by citizens. Madam President, evidence to show that property tax is a benefit principle. And we ought not to run away from it, Madam President. We ought not to propose this tax only focusing on what it can cost the taxpayers. But when you compare the benefits that taxpayers will receive from this type of intervention, Madam President, you will conclude without doubt that the benefits far outweigh the initial outlay. So, Madam President, on the revenue side, as articulated by the Honorable Minister of Finance, certainly our tax potential needs to be pursued relentlessly, and the intervention of the Revenue Authority is a vehicle that can be used, as other countries have used it too, Madam President, to improve the tax performance of the country. But also, Madam President, the Honorable Minister of Finance addressed the area of cutting wastage, corruption, inefficiency, and I dare say deliberate inefficiency through the advent of institutional strengthening. and he proposed the concept of the General Accounting Office. Let me state, Madam President, that the General Accounting Office concept and the General Accounting Office as an institution is a well-established institution in the developed world. And the GAO, Madam President, is in the accountability business. And when you look at the operations of these types of institutions worldwide, you would recognize that they have been very effective in fighting wastage, fraud, abuse, and mismanagement in government. And the outcome of that, Madam President, is value for money. You would find that the GAO, Madam President, provides significant benefits to a particular nation. It keeps the population informed. It has discretion on publishing findings. It also audits information. And they can also choose what to audit. And the result of this, Madam President, is that it reduces corruption, improves inefficiency, and very important, Madam President, it builds trust and morale in society, a major finding of the benefit of the General Accounting Office. And Madam President, if you take, for example, the Prt1 highway, one can say that there is no formal reporting mechanism that is independent. One can argue that there is no formal reporting system as it relates to budgeting. One can further argue, Madam President, that there is no formal reporting system, rather, to the public, reporting on issues of tendering procedure, variance, cost management, debt arrangement. And this failure to report on an independent basis, Madam President, leads to a loss in confidence. And the point is, Madam President, that these areas of reporting and accountability can be addressed effectively by an independent General Accounting Office. Madam President, this is necessary because I can tell you, as long as corrupt politicians can satisfy their clientelistic network by manipulating government resources, they keep themselves happy and the society unhappy. Weak institutions, Madam President, or no institutions, allow corrupt politicians, rather, to control government resources and turn the delivery of public goods into favors. This conduct, Madam President, is referred to as clientism, and this becomes the modus operandi of corrupt government. Madam President, there is no need for me to draw examples of favored contractors who would have benefited through this type of conduct in recent times. But what I can say, Madam President, is that if we are serious about bringing about accountability, if we have to focus on cutting wastage, eliminating corruption, improving efficiency, rather, and more than that, Madam President, weeding out deliberate inefficiency, we need to ensure that our institutions are strengthened. And what the Minister, the Honorable Minister of Finance, is articulating is that the General Accounting Office, Madam President, can provide significant benefit to the people of Trinidad and Tobago by ensuring that when you undertake large projects, there is value for money. So, Madam President, the Minister of Finance examined the strengthening of institutions, on the one hand, in increase our revenue collection. And that is through the advent of the Revenue Authority. And on the other hand, ensuring there is value for money by eliminating wastage, corruption, mismanagement through the advent of the General Accounting Office, through institutions, Madam President, that have been proven to bring significant benefit to nations. And Madam President, as my colleague, Senator Shrikissoon, would have articulated information from the World Economic Forum Global Competitiveness Report. And this is just to highlight and to prove that the direction in which the Honorable Minister of Finance is taking us regarding institutional strengthening is absolutely necessary. And quite rightly, he would have stated that there are 12 pillars of competitiveness. And I would like to focus on the pillar of institutions. And the Honorable Senator would have identified our fall in ranking. But I also want to point out, Madam President, that there's also a weighted average score that really tells us if we are getting better or getting worse. And if you look at institutions as a pillar overall, in 2011, we had a weighted average score of 3.7. In 2015, it fell to 3.4. I should say, Madam President, that the weighted average score is from 1 to 7, with 1 being your lowest performer and 7 being your highest performer. And therefore, Madam President, we have not just fallen in terms of our rank, but when you look at our weighted average score overall, we are not getting better. And this, Madam President, tells me that the Honorable Minister of Finance is on the right track by ensuring that there's institutional strengthening for our nation. And Madam President, just to point out a few, public trust in politicians. In 2011, 3.7, 2015, 3.4. Wastefulness in government spending. I repeat, wastefulness in government spending, Madam President. 3.1 in 2011, 2.5 in 2015. And one more, Madam President, strength of investor protection. Weighted average score, 6.7 in 2010, 5.8 in 2015, Madam President. If we are to truly engage in improving the competitiveness of our nation, we need to ensure that we have enabling institutions to provide an enabling environment for our firms to compete. Madam President, referring to the same report, and this is just to tell us in a more serious way how much we need the General Accounting Office. When you look at problematic factors in doing business, corruption was ranked as our second most problematic factor in doing business, and you can equate corruption with wastage. In 2011, it was not ranked in our first 3. And further, Madam President, Trinidad and Tobago being ranked as a high-income group, which sounds good, but according to the report, we are in the bottom 3 of the least competitive economies in this particular high-income category. So, Madam President, what it tells us is that we need to focus on strengthening our institutions to ensure, as the Minister of Finance indicated that he is pursuing, to increase our revenue collection and to ensure that there is the cutout of wastage and corruption in our affairs in Trinidad. For the next few minutes I have, Madam President, let me just speak a little bit on the role of ICT in national development. and I'm sure you would agree that ICT is an enabling tool and it is a major driver to development, as it often helps transition your economy to a knowledge-based society, a knowledge-based economy, and also promotes the improvement in business intelligence, which, by the way, helps to improve the ease of doing business. And Madam President, where we were in 2010, we had the Data Protection Bill, the Electronic Transaction Bill, passed in 2011 on the foundational work of the previous PNM administration then. But interestingly, Madam President, the subsidiary work and regulations needed to make these bills function in terms of what it can deliver through its use and through its operationalization was not done. And in 2010, Madam President, we had certain platform technologies in place. And the question that arises is what has happened since? And I say this in the context, Madam President, that we had an entire ministry to deal with science and technology. For example, Madam President, we had our platform technology, e-government, and the e-government backbone, providing benefits such as government internet gateway, access to information from ministries. You had government broadband network, which allowed for ministries to be sharing information, ministries and government agencies. And had these platform technologies been leveraged, Madam President, maybe today we would have been able to have complete e-government services in Trinidad and Tobago. And I say this, Madam President, because ICT, as an enabling tool, as an enabling resource, Madam President, can bring about a higher quality of life for the people in our country by ensuring that if these platform technologies are used properly, you can deliver complete government services to the people without the citizen having to leave his remote location. So, Madam President, I just wanted to share that a little bit. And in conclusion, what I attempted to do, Madam President, is to look at the budget presentation by the Honorable Minister of Finance, look at what exists in relevant literature, and develop a conceptual framework. And if we are to state that institutional strengthening as a latent construct, meaning that as an independent variable, the Revenue Authority and the General Accounting Office considered as institutional strengthening, we can hypothesize that the Revenue Authority improves revenue collection. And we can further hypothesize, Madam President, that improving revenue collection would improve our fiscal performance. We could also hypothesize in our conceptual framework, Madam President, that the General Accounting Office, if used properly, would reduce, eliminate corruption, wastage, and inefficiency. And that, in turn, would improve our fiscal position. And we could also hypothesize, Madam President, that ICT can act as a moderating variable to moderate the relationship that exists between Revenue Authority and the General Accounting Office, working hand in hand to improve our fiscal position, working hand in hand on both the revenue collection side, working hand in hand in terms of expenditure side by the reduction and elimination of wastage, mismanagement, and corruption. At the end of the day, Madam President, I express confidence that success in pursuing these initiatives as articulated by the Honorable Minister of Finance would lead to an improvement in our fiscal position, balancing the budget by the year 2018, and of course going further engaging or having fiscal surpluses, Madam President. So, Madam President, let me say what a joy it has been to participate in this debate. I trust that my contribution would have added value. And so, Madam President, I sincerely thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Dookie. I think this is an appropriate time to take the lunch break. So this sitting will be suspended until 1:45. We will return at 1:45.